These are the parts of your new CNC Taig Lathe as they come out of the box. This is the lathe frame with provision for bolting it to your workbench. It has the gearbox enclosed in a chip cover. The couplers for the twin screws have already had axial backlash adjusted out of them, and the gear train likewise has been adjusted for backlash. Manual operation is provided for with a hand crank that has 1/10,000th of an inch markings on it. The motor mount is a hinge on one side and is spring loaded on the other for tensioning the pulley. The motor already has the pulley sheave installed, and the direction of the motor has been reversed, so it works for this lathe. The switch box comes with the mounting hardware attached to it. The spindle already has the chuck trued and a step cut in it. This was done when the lathe was first assembled and tested to make sure that everything worked properly and to save you the trouble. The cross slide assembly likewise has already been adjusted. The gibs for the carriage have been adjusted, and for the cross slide. The drive nut for the cross slide has been snugged to remove backlash on that axis, and the drive nuts for the twin screws have already been adjusted as well. Manual operation is provided for with a hand crank that has 1/2 of 1,000th markings on it. The tailstock has comfortable knobs so you don't have to wield a hex wrench, and a quick chuck for drilling, which is easily removed if you want to use the dead center that comes on it. The drive screws are lapped and smooth, and chip covers are provided for all the screws. You also have the 2 rods for tightening the chuck, the belt, and an end cap so the twin screws don't lash around. These 4 hex wrenches come with the kit. The big one is for all the 1032 screws. This one is for the 832 screws, which only occur on the drive nuts. This one is for the drive nut on the cross slide only, which is a 632 screw. And this truncated hex wrench is for all the set screws. It's truncated so that you can get in there to adjust the gib on the cross slide, which after 100 hours of use or so might become necessary. Additional tools that you will need: a Phillips head screwdriver, an adjustable crescent wrench, and a machinist square is absolutely required. A little bottle of oil will help things go together easily too. So let's put it together. It won't take but 20 minutes. The very first thing to do is to install the spindle. The chuck has already been mounted and trued, and a step's been cut in it. And this is how the lathe was tested when it was first assembled before it was shipped. In order to install the spindle, just put a couple of drops of oil here and there to make life easy. Now, whey oil is manufactured especially for use on wheys, but I find that ordinary motor oil is perfectly adequate. The spindle should be slid till it's flush with the far end, and temporarily it should be snugged down so it doesn't slip around. The next step of the assembly is to install the cross-slide carriage. This comes already pre-assembled. The gibs have been adjusted on both parts so that it's snug. And all we need to do is install the screws. We'll just put a drop of oil to make life easy. And get the screws started in the drive nuts. The screws have been lapped, so they're very smooth. And the drive nuts have already been snugged down to remove backlash. This can all be done by hand, or to make it a little faster you can use a cordless drill. Just don't bite it too hard so that you don't mar the brass bearing. They should stick out about 6 inches from the drive nut. Add a little oil here. And another drop here. And now carefully fit it on the bed. It's nice and snug. Now we need to slide this until this end of the screw hits the brass coupler. It's it's hit it in the back. So we'll screw in the front one a little more until it hits the brass coupler. Get them going into the holes and slam them tight. Once both screws have been inserted all the way into the couplers, adjust the gearbox until you have 2 set screws visible and easily accessible. And snug up one on each of the drive screws. That's pretty snug, but not as hard as it could be. Then rotate the screws until you have the opposite set screw accessible. And crank this one down really tight. And the same with the one on the other side. When that's really tight, go back to the first side. The set screw that was just snug before. Now it gets cranked down tight like the other one. And the same on the back side. Smooth like butter. Now we can install the chip covers for the main drive screws. These parts are different, but they've got a flange that protrudes on one end, so you can tell which is which. You might want to bend this out just a little bitty bit. And insert it into the V-groove alongside of the lathe's bed. As you slide it in, be careful that it doesn't jam on the drive nut or as it gets to the end. Watch that it doesn't jam against the side of the coupler. And push that until this back end here does not stick out past this block. And once those are on, install the end cap. At this point, do not crank this down fully tight. We'll do that when we get the machine running. We can run the carriage all the way to the end to ensure that this is properly aligned before we crank this bolt down tight. Well, we're almost done now. Let's install the chip cover by loosening the holder. Get a little slack in those T-nuts and slide the aluminum chip cover around the screws under the bar. Line it up nicely and crank it down nice and tight. Now we can put on the tailstock. Totally simple. Now finally we can mount the motor. The motor comes pre-wired in reverse from the way it came from the factory. The switch box has the hardware supplied. But to get at it, first thing you need to do is remove the cover. And once the cover is removed, and remove the hardware from the back side of the screws. The hardware on the frame needs to be removed, just the nuts and the washers. And now the motor can be mounted on the frame. Simply set over top of the screws. On the hinge side, put the washers with the smooth sides always facing the paint. And just set the lock nuts on loosely. On the spring side, make sure that this plate is around the tubes so that it properly slides up and down. And we can put on the washers and the nuts just loosely for now. And the switch box mounts in these two holes in the frame. On the back, you start with a washer, the smooth side facing the painted surface so it doesn't scratch. followed by the lock washer, and the nut, and crank that down until it's nice and tight. And now replace the lid. On this side, the bolts are cranked down nice and tight, so the motor is held firmly in place. On this side, install the washers and the lock nuts, and crank down the lock nuts until they just touch the tops of the tubes here. Once that's done, it's time to install the pulley. Start out with it on the smallest spindle pulley and the largest of the motor pulleys. This next step is extremely important. The pulley has to be mounted perfectly square. Alignment is very important, because if it isn't perfectly aligned, you can get a horrible motor bounce. So adjust the spindle until the pulley is perfectly aligned, and then lock it down. And the very last thing to do is mount the tool post. It doesn't need to be very tight. You have to get your own cutters. And there she be. The completed CNC Taig. It is possible to use it manually. Hand cranks make it easy to adjust things. This is like butter because it's geared down 4 times. So may you make much swarf and produce many beautiful items. Good luck, have fun.